Anthony. Of course, with what you mentioned, important as well, a very important aspect is the legal framework of all this. And I'm moving on to Dr. Valenzia. Apart from supporting and promoting remote piloted aircraft systems, the policy also sets out to identify further concepts that may better assist the aircraft leasing sector to continue growing and developing not just in quality, in quantity, but also in quality. So, Dr. Valenzia, in what way, in your opinion, is Malta an ideal jurisdiction for such niche? And also, how can Malta capitalize further from aircraft leasing?
Hello, good morning. Firstly, thank you for setting up the whole structure and the policy, and thank you Commissioner Vella and Maria and their team for actually drafting the policy itself. I'm going to give you a fright. So the answer to your question is Malta is not good for leasing, straight. This is the point of where we need to get to. As Carmelo Vella stated and the Minister stated, this is a stepping stone. This is the start of the project. It's not the end of the project. Luckily, I think that leasing can become very good, but we need to address a couple of points, and that's...
Okay.
I purposely said that this is not going to be a marketing or promotional event for leasing. It needs to be an analysis or a short analysis of what needs to be done. Otherwise, it will be a useless exercise in the context of a policy where we need to develop a product. And this is the only product out of most of the aviation products which happens to be on the island haphazardly and not by design. Luckily enough, a couple of years back, Captain Patch and the government and the ministry embarked on a project to identify the gaps when it came to the leasing industry from a legal perspective. So from a legal perspective and from, let's say, an accounting and fiscal perspective, those gaps have been identified. And I think we're already reaping benefit in certain incentives, but we're reaping benefit more at an operating license stroke AOC stage. So what I call the actual ops part of things is actually benefiting from those incentives which we got in for leasing. The problem is leasing. And the problem is leasing for two reasons. And these two reasons can be addressed now, because I think Malta as a jurisdiction in general is going through a very important shift in its outlook. And I'm speaking about a shift here, I'm referring to the financial services industry. So pretty much Malta over the last years has had this massive shock in not just the grey listing, but also the approach which has been taken vis-à-vis Malta by banks in general. And that shock is being addressed by the jurisdiction moving towards more of those entities which are actually physically present on the ground. So rather than having what are known as SPVs, which are special purpose vehicles, which are important, but now we are moving towards actually having knowledge, people and offices on the ground. The unfortunate element is that we're still at the infancy of having these large groups, which are the large leasing groups, which actually exist on the ground. But this is where we need to focus on. And there's David here. Ryanair has its own ownership strategic arm. We have its operational arm, its AOC. But we don't have, let's say, all or Wizz Air's, let's say, leasing and ownership arm. And they're not just the only two players. There are many more players. There are hundreds of players. The key jurisdiction in the field today is Ireland, at least in Europe. Then you've got Hong Kong and Singapore. But in order to go there, there are two elements which need to be really addressed. The first one is the knowledge base, and this again is in the policy. But we mustn't just see the knowledge base from a technical perspective. We have to see it from a financial and a technical perspective, from a financial services sector in relation to aviation. That knowledge we have to foster, and we have to create an environment to bring these people onto the island. Because it's ultimately these people that man these leasing houses, and it's these people who will actually convince their principals, the large lease financiers, to actually set the business on the ground. So firstly, there has to be enough resource to be able for these people to actually set up this type of venture. I'll mention an issue with a client in the aviation sector. I mean, certain clients throughout Malta at the moment are having difficulty even sourcing financial controllers or people with enough financial knowledge from a practical perspective in order to move these businesses forward. So if we're not going to address these key elements, you can't be able to hit the high notes and try and get that type of business. Again, it's a start, and I think I invite Captain Parch and Dr. Vella and the Ministry, let's set up a working group on leasing to address these points. The second major point, and this is the last point in leasing, but it's tied to the first one, is getting our banking sector, and this also applies to the operating side, the AOCs, but let's focus on leasing. We have to get our banking sector to be familiar with the product and to be happy to service the product. I think from my perspective, we've got a major advantage. We've had a change in CEO at BOV. Everyone knows him here. He's been with the bank for years, and he is finally speaking about that outlook and saying, he asked me personally, Nick, we need to understand the product. We need to know what you need to do. But this is very important. Why is it important? Because, David, I'm going to just use Ryanair as an example at the treasury level, at the holding level. In a leasing company, you need to transfer 40 million euros in 10 minutes, not 10 hours. And 10 hours is inachievable in Malta to transfer 40 million euros. We have to remember that this is not an aircraft operating company where you could possibly have issues relating to sanctioned individuals. That's fine. It's understandable that it's a difficult area to work in. But when you're working with Treasury, at top level, intra-group loans, or transfers to builders, or transfers to financiers, those transactions, which are probably driven by London or New York, and are typically driven by those jurisdictions, or possibly Singapore and Hong Kong, the expectation now, not from a legal perspective, because I think legally, and I commend my colleagues, but I think legally it's fantastic here. We have the best firms. Everyone commends us for the service we give. The problem is what happens on the ground at the banking level. If we're not going to achieve those speeds, and they are literally those speeds, 10 minutes, we're speaking of entities which are all subject to due diligence. Some of them are listed. These are very reputable entities, okay, supported by major banks in the planet, literally. If we are not going to think of that product and we're going to hit that level of service at banking, then let's not speak about leasing. So what I would suggest is that the next phase now is luckily we have we also have another good bank who knows this business. It has to be, again, given the comfort that the infrastructure is there. That's HSBC. HSBC is a major player in this business too. We discount it because possibly we only, unfortunately, look at it from its core retail element. But that's a major player in this field. So we have to sit down. We have to start educating these people, getting them comfortable with the concept of the lawyers, the accountancy firms, the audit firms who are here on the ground, the practitioners, the services. We have to tell them that, look, we want to attract physical businesses. Because the banks today, in order to really allow you to do this, they said, don't give me an SPV. I don't want to hear about an SPV. I want to see at least 5 people in your office here doing it. So I think we have the potential. But now we have to think strategically to move forward and attract that business. But that needs a lot of hard work. And I think those are the 2 key elements. And there is the goodwill of everyone to do it. But we need to do it now.
Thank you, Dr. Valenzia. It feels like it's a bit challenging